Chapter 13, Another View of Hester. I may or may not finish the entire chapter, so if this cuts off in the middle, just recognize that you'll continue on with the chapter, continuing where I've left off. Chapter 13, Another View of Hester. In her late singular interview with Mr. Dimmesdale, Hester Prynne was shocked at the condition to which she found the clergyman reduced. His nerves seemed absolutely destroyed. There's that word again. That nerve that has to do with Dimmesdale always. And so he is absolutely destroyed at this point. His moral force was abased, and that was the one thing that we saw that was really good about him, and now it's abased into more than childish weakness. And where children might be good, his is a weakness. It groveled helpless on the ground, even while his intellectual faculties retained their pristine strength, or had perhaps acquired a morbid energy, which disease only could give them. The it here is his moral force. So his moral force, that's not working. His moral force is not, is helpless on the ground. That's a really interesting image to consider there. With her knowledge of the train of circumstances hidden from all the others, and so here Hawthorne has assumed now that Hawthorne assumes that the reader knows that Demi is baby daddy. So he is assuming now that you have picked that up from standing on the, from him standing on the scaffold and from whatever Chillingworth saw on his chest. So he's left enough clues that he assumes that you know, and that Hester knows. She could readily infer that besides the legitimate action of his own conscience, that's an important word given what we've been talking about with Thoreau and Emerson, a terrible machinery had been brought to bear and was still operating on Mr. Dimmesdale's well-being and repose. And here machinery is that physical, society, scientific type word. So I'm just going to connect that to society, which is in contrast with his natural ideas. Knowing what this poor fallen man had once been, and he is not anymore, her whole soul was moved by the shuddering terror with which he had appealed to her. And so she is recognizing that this is a man that she used to love, and now he is completely different. He had appealed to her, the outcast woman, for support against his instinctively discovered enemy. So here we are recognizing that he has figured out who his enemy is, and Hester needs to protect him. She decided, moreover, that he had a right to her utmost aid. We wonder why he has a right. Is this because of their previous relationship? Is it that anybody has a right to help? What is that right? Little accustomed in her long seclusion from society to measure her ideas of right and wrong by any standard external to herself, this is an authentic note. This is considering how is society different from our own intuition and recognition of what's wrong and right. So she's little accustomed to hearing from society and instead is thinking only internally. Hester saw, or seemed to see, that there lay a responsibility on her in reference to the clergyman. That gives us a hint to the question that we asked earlier, that maybe it's not because of their previous relationship, but because any other human being is worthy of help if an injustice is being done, kind of like what we saw with Thoreau, right? So that there lay a responsibility upon her in reference to the clergyman, which she owed to no other, nor to the world besides. But here we're seeing that she owes it to no other, so maybe there is partially this relationship as well. But she, for some reason, doesn't owe the world anything, so we might consider why she doesn't owe the world anything. The links that united her to the rest of humankind, the links flowing, I can't see this, silver, gold, whatever the material, I'm sorry. there we go, or whatever the material, had all been broken. So this is a reiteration of the fact that she is an outcast. Here was the iron link of a mutual crime, which neither he nor she could break. Like all other ties, it brought along with it its obligations. Notice that iron, which kind of goes along, this all reminds me of the first chapter, where he's talking about the iron bars on the prison door, and how crime is something that is known to all civilizations all the time, and so recognizing that they did something against society is really the connection there, and this all draws back to that chapter 1. Hester Prynne did not now occupy precisely the same position in which we beheld her during the earlier periods of her ignominy. Years had come and gone, so he has just decided not to tell us any of the details there, but just that time has passed. Pearl was now 7 years old. Her mother, with the Scarlet Letter on her breast, glittering in its fantastic embroidery, had long become a familiar object to the townspeople. So even though it's glittering and fantastic, we also get the fact that it's ordinary. So we've got almost conflicting ideas there, that no matter how extraordinary something is, that it becomes ordinary over time. As is apt to be the case when a person stands out in any prominence before a community and, at the same time, interferes neither with public nor individual interests and convenience, a species of general regard had ultimately grown up in reference to Hester Prynne. So people start to like her and respect her because she doesn't interfere, and because she's prominent in her help. It is to the credit of human nature, here's another of his specific references to the goodness of human nature, that, except where its selfishness is brought into play, it loves more readily than it hates. So he is saying something very, very specific about how human beings are, but also the thing that gets in the way is when humans think only of themselves instead of goodness in general. Hatred, by a general and quiet process, will even be transformed to love, unless the change is impeded by a continually new irritation of the original feeling of hostility. That is really interesting, that hatred even becomes love just because feeling naturally moves toward love. In this matter of Hester Prynne, there was neither irritation nor irksomeness. She had never battled with the public, but submitted uncomplainingly to its worst usage. So here we are also recognizing that the public actually has made terrible use of Hester Prynne. She made no claim upon it being public. In requital for what she had suffered, she did not weigh upon its sympathies. Then also, the blameless purity of her life during all of these years in which she had been set apart to infamy were reckoned largely in her favor. This is a real contrast to her sin, isn't it? That she has acted with such blameless purity that, and we know that purity is not what she was originally known for. So her actions have somehow flipped to the other extreme for people. With nothing now to lose in the sight of mankind, so nothing now to lose in sight of mankind, that doesn't mean that she has nothing left to lose, just with society she has nothing left to lose. And with no hope and seemingly no wish of gaining anything, it could only be a genuine regard for virtue that had brought back the poor wanderer into its paths. So it is her virtue. It was perceived, too, that while Hester never put forward even the humblest title to share in the world's privileges, further than to breathe the common air and earn daily bread for little Pearl and herself by the faithful labor of her hands, she was quick to acknowledge her sisterhood with the race of man, whatever benefits were to be conferred. So she still recognizes humanity which might be different from society, right? None was so ready as to give up her little substance to every demand of poverty, even though the bitter-hearted pauper threw back a jibe in requital of the food brought regularly to his door, or the garments wrought for him by the fingers that could have embroidered a monarch's robe. So she continues to have a positive outlook even when she is being when she's getting no thanks for it. None was so self-devoted as Hester when pestilence stalked through town. So you see that even though she's recognizing that humanity is more important than society, she is acting in the best interests of humanity and therefore really supporting society, which is a little bit ironic, and that even though she is an outcast from this society, she is actually the best potential member of this society. She is doing all of the things that Puritans are expected to do: give up of themselves and help the community, everything for the community, and nothing for self, and self-abasement and no pleasure. So she is, in fact, right now being the best Puritan. She's expecting nothing in return. In fact, she seems to be appreciating her particular role. In all seasons of calamity, indeed, whether generals or of individuals, the outcast of society at once found her place. She came not as a guest, but as a rightful inmate. There's that prison language again, reminding us of that first chapter again. Into the household that was darkened by trouble, as if its gloomy twilight were a medium in which she was entitled to hold intercourse with her fellow creatures. So she is meeting with people in the dark. Okay, so not in the open light space. So this is the light dark where you can't see things as well. And so we're considering why we're not able to see things as well when Hester is tending to other people. There glimmered the embroidered letter with its comfort in its unearthly ray. So the letter is giving off light here, and whereas before it glowed a lurid glow, here it's giving comfort in its unearthly ray. So we're considering the difference in how he's describing the letter and potentially its perception by the people who are seeing it. Elsewhere, the token of sin, it was the taper of the sick chamber. So it is bringing light to people who are sick. It had even thrown its gleam, so much light here, right? In the sufferer's hard extremity across the verge of time. It had shown him where to set his foot while the light of the earth was fast becoming dim. There's that Dimsdale word again. And ere the light of futurity could reach him. In such emergencies, Hester's nature showed itself to be warm and rich, and this is her nature. And it's not necessarily who she was able to be right away after, because remember, it's this warm richness, this passion, this wellspring of human tenderness that got her in trouble in the first place, and now she's using it for other purposes, other than her own passion for another human being. Unfailing to every real demand and inexhaustible by the largest, her breast, with its badge of shame, was but the softer pillow for the head that needed one. So the fact that she has a badge of shame somehow gives her more comfort, or gives other people more comfort, knowing that she somehow isn't perfect, can somehow give people more, and that she is this particular role in society, can give people who are going through hard times more comfort. She was a self-ordained sister of mercy. So consider that he is now using religious terms to describe her, even though she has been cast out by that particular part of society, and that's the part of society that shunned her very, very specifically. But now she is a sister of mercy more than even potentially those who sought that role officially. Or we may rather say, the world's heavy hand had so ordained her, when neither the world nor she looked forward to this result. Oh, it's interesting, she doesn't actually want this, huh? The letter was the symbol of her calling. Such helpfulness was found in her, so much more to do and power to sympathize, that many people refused to interpret the Scarlet A by its original signification. They said that it meant able. So strong was Hester Prynne, with a woman's strength. So here he's getting into some gender issues, interestingly, and that there's something strong and able about her as a woman. And so where she has given up her femininity in a sexual way, she's using her strength as a woman to be able and to help. It was only the darkened house that could contain her. When the sunshine came again, she was not there. So here we've got that contrast again. So she's coming out only in the dark, when things are dim, when people can't see things as well. And somehow we've got to say, is that, like, does that have to do with us being the reader, or people being able to see things inside other people's soul? Is this about, like, is she not qualified to stand in the sun? Is that her choice? Is that society's choice? Those are all of the questions that I should be asking myself right now. Her shadow had faded across the threshold. The helpful inmate had departed without one backward glance to gather up the meed of gratitude, if any were in the hearts of those whom she had served so zealously. So yet again, it doesn't even matter if there's thanks or not. She is still going to serve with passion these people, and looking for nothing in return. Meeting them in the street, she never raised her head to receive their greeting. If they were resolute to accost her, she laid her finger on the Scarlet Letter and passed on. So she now is owning that badge. And instead of having other people put it on her, she is now turning other people away and separating herself from society on her own, rather than what it was at the beginning, that 7 years ago. This might be pride, but was so like humility that it produced all the softening influence of the latter quality in the public mind. So here, this is interesting because pride and humility are opposites, and yet they seem to be showing in the same way. And that what might actually be pride, people might think of as humility. So that kind of humble bragging that potentially we might think about. The public is despotic in its temper. It is capable of denying common justice when too strenuously demanded as a right. But, and those transitions are important, but quite as frequently, it awards more than justice when the appeal is made, as despots love to have it made, entirely to its generosity. Interpreting Hester Prynne's deportment as an appeal of this nature, society was inclined to show its former victim a more benign countenance than she cared to be favored with, or perhaps than she deserved. And here, when it says she deserved, who determines what she deserves is my question. Because right now she seems to be deciding that she does not deserve it. She doesn't care to be favored with it. She doesn't want it. She's grown accustomed to being separated from society and not invited in. The rulers and the wise and learned men of the community were longer in acknowledging the influence of Hester's good qualities than the people. So the people do it before the learned men and the leaders. So again, that's where what Emerson and Thoreau are talking about is that the people who are leading don't necessarily do it for conscience, and so conscience will come later for those people. The prejudices which they shared in common with the latter were fortified in themselves by an iron framework of reasoning. There's that iron again, that man-made metal that bars the jail. And reasoning, so we are putting reasoning along with that thing, like as if we're locked in to reasoning, and reasoning actually restricts rather than opens up and gives more freedom. Then it made it far tougher labor to expel them. So it's harder for these people to forgive Hester and to bring her in a different way because of the way that they started. Day by day, nevertheless, their sour and rigid wrinkles were relaxing into something which, in the due course of years, might grow to be an expression of almost benevolence. Almost, not quite. Thus it was that with the men of rank, on whom their eminent position imposed the guardianship of public morals. Individuals in private life, meanwhile, had quite forgiven Hester Prynne for her frailty. Nay, more. Oh, look at that, more than forgiveness. They had begun to look upon the Scarlet Letter as a token, not of that one sin for which she had borne so long and dreary a penance, but of her many good deeds since. Do you see that woman with the embroidered badge? They would say to strangers. It is our Hester, the town's own Hester, who is so kind to the poor, so helpful to the sick, so comfortable to the afflicted. So here, the good supersedes the bad. And actually, and that's how hate can turn to love, is just with over time getting used to something and seeing it for what it is. Then it is true, the propensity of human nature again, to tell the very worst of itself, when embodied in the person of another, would constrain them to whisper the black scandal of bygone years. So human nature still likes that there's that prurient interest there of wanting to gossip and hear that stuff. It was nonetheless a fact, however, that in the eyes of the very men who spoke thus, the Scarlet Letter had the effect of a cross on a nun's bosom. So again, that Sister of Mercy comes back up, this idea of holiness. It imparted to the wearer a kind of sacredness, which enabled her to walk securely amid all peril. So it keeps her safe also. It doesn't, where somebody else might get accosted in the middle of the night when they're walking out alone. The Scarlet Letter, like if you saw a nun walking around, might make somebody pause and go somewhere else. Had she fallen among thieves, it would have kept her safe. It was reported and believed by many that an Indian had drawn his arrow against the badge, and that a missile struck it, but fell harmless to the ground. So it is now, in every sense of the word, armor. In that same way that the Scarlet Letter had reflected back at her out of the governor's armor, now she has her own armor. And is protected in some way by this A instead of being made more vulnerable by it. So everything has absolutely switched and done a complete flop. The effect of the symbol, or rather, the position in respect to society that was indicated by it, on the mind of Hester Prynne herself, was powerful and peculiar. So here our switch goes from other people's interpretation to Hester's interpretation. So Hester Prynne's interpretation now, and how she has changed inside. So this is society's view, and this is her own view. And remember, in how you considered your own flaws and weaknesses, consider how potentially how you see it differently from the rest of the world. All the light and graceful foliage of her character had been withered up by this red-hot brand. And notice that wording, where she was natural, and had foliage, now the brand, that red-hot brand, remember that woman who wanted to brand her on the forehead, but again, brand iron, that's society, And she has been withered by that. So all of that night, those beautiful trees that were so luxuriant before are withered up under this, and had long ago fallen away, leaving a bare and harsh outline, which might have been repulsive had she possessed friends or companions to be repelled by it. Interesting that here we are not saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but rather beauty is what society sees. So here this is her response, that she has let herself be withered, but nobody else can see that because she won't let anybody else get close enough. Even the attractiveness of her person had undergone a similar change. Remember that mind-body connection that we talked about with Demi? And also consider that she used to be absolutely beautiful. Think about that description of her on the scaffold with her shining hair, and like the color in her cheeks and the way that she looked at people, and how everybody just thought that she was very, very beautiful. It might be partly owing to the studied austerity of her dress, because remember, she's dressing in grays and browns, and partly the lack of demonstration in her manners. It was a sad transformation too. That is Hawthorne's comment, is that he is not happy that this has happened. That her rich and luxuriant hair had either been cut off or was so completely hidden by a cap. So here, her hair is partly a symbol for what she has lost. Where it was shining in the sun in the beginning, whoops, I can't spell shining, now it's completely hidden. So all of that stuff that made her her in those first chapters is gone. That not a shining lock of it ever once gushed into the sunshine. So there's that sunshine again. She is not in the light. Okay, so she is not in the light, which means that goodness is not shining down on her, just like Dimmesdale is dim in that he can't see things necessarily. Here, she is being shielded, or is shielding herself from that light, and not getting that goodness. It was due in part to all these causes, but still more to something else that there seemed to be no longer in Hester's face for love to dwell upon. And love capitalized, that's personification. So there's no longer anything in Hester's face for love to dwell upon. Nobody could possibly love this woman in the way that she was loved prior to her sin, because now she's hideous and dried up and withered. Nothing in Hester's form, though majestic and statue-like, that passion would ever dream of clasping in its embrace. She is no longer allowed to have that sexuality and that passion anymore that yet again got her in trouble. Nothing in Hester's bosom to ever make it again the pillow of affection, again referring specifically to that sin. And these are the things, the love, the passion, and the affection, that she is no longer worthy of. And we ask, why isn't she worthy of those things? What has gone away? Some attribute that departed from her, the permanence of which had been essential to keep her a woman. She is not even a woman anymore, much in the same way that nuns are not women in that particular way. So he is absolutely talking about sexuality here. Such is frequently the fate, and such the stern development of the feminine character and person, when the woman has encountered and lived through an experience of peculiar severity. So this is something that happens, that has the potential of happening to anybody when they go through a hard time. If she be all tenderness, she will die. Okay, so hardship could kill some women. If she survive, the tenderness will either be crushed out of her and the outward semblance is the same, crushed so deeply into her heart that it can never show itself more. And so Hawthorne wants us to feel very, very sad about that is all gone for her. The latter is perhaps the truest theory, and so we are meant to understand that something has happened to Hester now that has crushed her so deeply, that has crushed and herself is so deep in her heart that she may as well be dead, which is very, very sad. She, who has once been a woman, no longer so, and has ceased to be so, might at any moment, oh hope, at any moment become a woman again, if there were only the magic touch to effect the transfiguration. We shall see whether Hester Prynne were ever afterwards so touched and so transfigured. So there's a possibility, and we wonder if he's talking about, kind of this sexuality and this femininity, what that touch might be. And we also are left with this, we shall see, that good old foreshadowing. And since we have listened, we have some recollection probably of what that touch may or may not be. Much of the marble coldness, so yet again we're going back to things that are cold and hard, like that iron. Much of the marble coldness of Hester's first impression was to be attributed to the circumstance that her life had turned, in great measure, from passion and feeling to thought. So here now he's actually saying what he's alluded to all of this time, this idea that feeling and human nature is more important than science and study and learning. So that bleary-eyed physician or scholar rather comes to mind, and so where we might think that thought and contemplation is good, because it is so closely juxtaposed with the loss of her femininity and who she is as a person, we recognize that this idea that she is now thinking about things is bad. Whoops, I switched colors accidentally. That's supposed to be red. Standing alone in the world, alone as to any dependence on society, there's society again, and with little Pearl to be guided and protected, alone, we're repeating that word, and hopeless of retrieving her position, even if she had not scorned to consider it desirable, she cast away the fragments of a broken chain. The world's law was no law for her mind. This is a problem. Here she is, she's the best Puritan, but she has decided that these rules, while she may actually be living them, that is not why she's doing what she's doing. It was an age in which the human intellect, newly emancipated, had taken a more active and wider range than for many centuries before. So here we're talking about book learning, right? And the age of discovery and things like that. Men of the sword had overthrown nobles and kings. Men bolder than these had overthrown and rearranged, not actually, but within the sphere of theory, which was their most real abode, the whole system of ancient prejudice, wherewith was linked much of ancient principle. Hester Prynne imbibed this spirit. She assumed a freedom of speculation, then common enough on the other side of the Atlantic, but which our forefathers, had they known it, would have held to be a deadlier crime than that stigmatized by the Scarlet Letter. So this thinking is worse than adultery. Bad, okay? Because she is considering overthrowing potentially all of these ideas, the men of the sword, but here it's the thinking that's making this happen, the sphere of theory, that's the problem. And certainly the Puritans don't want her thinking about what's wrong with society, and yet they've placed her in a position to do just that. In her lonesome cottage by the seashore, thoughts visited her, such as she dared to enter no other dwelling in New England. Shadowy guests that would have been as perilous as demons to their entertainer, could could they have been seen so much as knocking at her door. So she is not welcoming this. She doesn't actually want this to these thoughts to be coming to her. She is trying to repent and be good, and yet the actual result of this Scarlet Letter is to make her think and to make her consider the inefficacy of the Scarlet Letter. It is remarkable that persons who speculate the most boldly often conform with the most perfect quietude to the external regulations of society. The thought suffices them without investing itself in the flesh and blood of action. So here we're talking about people who think but don't actually do. And so the people who think often are not actively trying to overthrow anything, but that those thoughts are potentially just as dangerous in overthrowing. So it seemed to be with Hester. Yet, had little Pearl never come to her from the spiritual world, it might have been far otherwise. Oh, so Pearl, who is her dearest treasure, and also that mark of sin, another Scarlet Letter, is also making her think this way. If not for Pearl, she might do something different. So we think why there. Then she might have come down to us in history, hand in hand with Anne Hutchinson. There's Anne Hutchinson again, guys, as the foundress of a religious sect. So she is not doing because she is trying to protect her daughter. She might, in one of her phases, have been a prophetess. So these are the possibilities for somebody who is thinking about society in this way. She might, and not improbably would, have suffered death from the stern tribunals of the period for attempting to undermine the foundations of the Puritan establishment. But she's not because of Pearl. And so the danger that she actually presents, that she could present, that she potentially should present, she is yet again withholding inside of herself and not letting that out there. But in the education of her child, the mother's enthusiasm of thought had something to wreak itself upon. Providence, in the person of this little girl, had assigned to Hester's charge the germ blossom of womanhood, to be cherished and developed amid a host of difficulties. So here, if we think back to the conversation in the governor's hall about how Pearl could actually help her to consider things, it actually is helping the Puritans by having Pearl there, in that she is considering how to develop her daughter instead of how to fight back against this society that has been so unfair to her. Everything was against her. The world was hostile, which is really interesting considering earlier how we were talking about how everybody in the town now really appreciates Hester, but still there's a hostility toward her and Pearl that doesn't let them back in. The child's own nature had something wrong in it, which continually betokened that she had been born amiss. The effluence of her mother's lawless passion, and often impelled Hester to ask, in bitterness of heart, whether it were for good or ill that the poor creature had been born at all. So here she's considering if Pearl, because of how she has been cast out and how people treat her, if it would have been better for Pearl not to have been born at all. And here, when he talks about the child's own nature, that something had gone amiss in it, who is thinking that this was something wrong or amiss? That seems to be rather than Hawthorne's interpretation, rather than how society is treating her, how the Puritans are treating her and seeing her. Indeed, the same dark question often rose to her mind with reference to the whole race of womanhood. She is considering now what it means to be a woman. Was existence worth accepting, even to the happiest among them? Wow, boy, oh boy, it really sucks to be a woman in general, even if even if you happen to be, one of the leading women. As concerned her own individual existence, she had long ago decided in the negative and dismissed the point as settled. So she says that it is absolutely not worth existing, and dismissed that and says, all right, so it's not worth existing, so I'll do what I need to do. A tendency to speculation, there's that thought again, though it may keep a woman quiet as it does man, yet it makes her sad. She discerns, it may be, such a hopeless task before her. As a first step, the whole system of society is to be torn down and built up anew. So here, this is feminism, and he is recognizing that in order for women's existence to be worthwhile, the whole system needs to come down, is what Hester is considering. Then, the very nature of the opposite sex, or its long hereditary habit. He's questioning whether there's a nature in this gendered world, or if it's just something that has been ingrained in us over time, which has become like nature, is essentially modified before woman can be allowed to assume what seems a fair and suitable position. Finally, all other difficulties being obviated, woman cannot take advantage of these preliminary reforms until she herself shall have undergone a still mightier change. So not only does society need to change, but also the way people see themselves, that the actual self and self-perception needs to change. In which, perhaps, the ethereal essence, wherein she has her truest life, will be found to have evaporated. A woman never overcomes these problems by any exercise of thought. And I think that he is also saying that nobody overcomes these problems just by thinking about them, that potentially action is needed. They are not to be solved, or only in one way. If her heart chance to come uppermost, they vanish. Oh, so there's that heart again, heart versus head. And so if she thinks in her heart what must be done, the thoughts actually vanish, and that's the difference, right? So it's not even action, it's actually that feeling and that understanding. Thus, Hester Prynne, whose heart had lost its regular and healthy throb, so she's not even human anymore, let alone a woman, wandered without a clue in the dark labyrinth of mind. That does not sound good, being stuck within her own mind. Now turned aside by an insurmountable precipice, now starting back from a deep chasm. Boy, nothing good in front of her. There was wild and ghastly scenery all around her, and a home and comfort nowhere. At times, a fearful doubt strove to possess her soul, which is interesting because is this, like here when we're talking about soul, are we talking about the devil there? Whether it were not better to send Pearl at once to heaven and go herself to such futurity as eternal justice should provide. So she is actually thinking about, would it be better if I were to kill Pearl and myself? Rather than live in this particular world, in our particular station. And here is the absolute key to this chapter. The Scarlet Letter had not done its office. And we can think about that in a lot of different ways, right? Because technically, if we look at the first half of this chapter, she's doing all of the things, that a good Puritan should be doing. She is, in fact, the best of the Puritans in terms of doing what's right. So in what she's doing, it's what the Puritans expect. They think that the Scarlet Letter has worked, but really by making her think about her station instead of just accepting her into society, it has made her question everything and in fact question society, which is the worst possible outcome. for what this has done. The Scarlet Letter had not done its office, so society has not actually reformed this woman. It has not made her realize the way that they want it to, the way they wanted it to say, oh, wow, I was wrong, and this sin is bad. She may be acting that way and be responding physically that way, but inside her own heart and mind, something very, very different is going on. Now, however, her interview with the Reverend Mr. Dimsdale on the night of his vigil had given her a new theme of reflection. So now she's got something else to think about. And held up to her an object that appeared worthy of any exertion and sacrifice in its attainment. So she now has another goal after talking to Demi. She had witnessed the intense misery beneath which the minister struggled, or, to speak more accurately, had ceased to struggle. He's given up, right? He's given up to this guilt and to Chillingworth, etc. She saw that he stood on the verge of lunacy, if he had not already stepped across it. It was impossible to doubt that whatever painful efficacy there might be in the secret sting of remorse, a deadlier venom had been infused into it by the hand that proffered relief. Interesting. So here we've got the secret sting of remorse, which is his internal guilt, that might actually be worse than the other. A secret enemy had been continually by his side under the semblance of a friend and helper, and had availed himself of the opportunities thus afforded for tampering with the delicate springs of Mr. Dimsdale's nature. So again, here we're going back to the Chillingworth-Dimsdale connection. Hester could not but ask herself whether there had not originally been a defect of truth, courage, and loyalty on her own part in allowing the minister to be thrown in a position where so much evil was to be foreboded and nothing auspicious to be hoped. So she's recognizing her own culpability in letting Chillingworth get close to Dimsdale, because really she had the power to stop that. Her only justification lay in the fact that she had been able to discern no method of rescuing him from the blacker ruin than had overwhelmed herself, except by acquiescing in Roger Chillingworth's scheme of disguise. So she, her intention is to save him from what she has endured. So we see that neither of them have come out particularly well from either of those situations. And we have to recognize that neither, Dimsdale not being found out and living with the guilt, and Hester being absolutely ostracized and punished by society, neither of them are doing particularly well. Under that impulse, she had made a choice and had chosen, as it now appeared, the more wretched alternative of the two. That's Hawthorne's commentary there. She determined to redeem her error so far as it might yet be possible. Strengthened by the years of hard and solemn trial, she felt herself no longer so inadequate to cope with Roger Chillingworth as on that night, abased by sin and half maddened by the ignominy that was still new when they had talked together in the prison chamber. She had climbed her way since then to a higher point. The old man, on the other hand, had brought himself nearer to her level, or perhaps below it, by the revenge that he had stooped for. In fine, Hester Prynne resolved to meet her former husband and do what might be in her power to rescue the victim on whom she had evidently set this gripe. The occasion was not long to seek. One afternoon, walking with Pearl in a retired part of the peninsula, she beheld the old physician, with a basket on one arm and a staff in the other, stooping along the ground in quest of roots and herbs to concoct his medicines withal. So now we're getting back into some action, and that is this chapter.